My overall outcome when we go into a classroom that I would like to see is that everybody would have an opportunity to participate, everybody. So through the process of having them actually write something down, that is one level of engagement that everybody contributed to an answer that was in class. To then have them pair and share their answer to another student would also help them create another level of engagement. And then we could take it to the next level, a group of 4, so on and so forth. But the idea of getting everybody a chance to participate in class and start to voice their opinion was really one of the earlier stages as we started to progress to where we are today.
One of the important things to Mark Orchard as a teacher is that the students are engaged. And what tends to happen in other classes is that you have about 5 to 6 students who are really confident in their ability to present the subject material that we're learning, and they're the ones that primarily do the talking and the teaching to other students. But with the structure that Mark Orchard provides, where you have groups of 4 throughout the class, everyone is expected to be engaged in the class. And in other classes where you'll have lots of students who may get distracted, who may be sleeping in class or be pulling out their phone, that's really not possible in this class because you're consistently engaged and in the process of teaching those in your group and learning from the students in your group.
The journal really did evolve over a period of time, and a lot of it was prompted by the idea of participation in class. And I thought, well, how can we learn to bring everybody into the classroom and have everybody participate? So what I started doing, I said, okay, this is a question, I want everybody to respond. And so all the students then would write down an answer. So rather than just having one person answered, we had the entire class, a number of how many was in the students all responding to the same question. And then that led to, well, is there a way that we could structure that a little better so that they could organize their thoughts? And as they did organize their thoughts, it gave them a chance then to share one with another. Again, we base it upon the principle of participation, that if I have something written down, if I get called on, all I have to do is read what I have written down, or I can share it within my groups. And so we started moving into groups so that they could start to share their ideas. So it just became a platform to actually write down what they were thinking and how they would actually respond to it.
The journal is set up into 3 different areas. The first is the definition section, where you have a list of definitions that you're supposed to get, not necessarily looking them up in a dictionary or anything like that. But what I love is that I get to find my working definition of these words that Mark Orchard's picked out that will be applicable to the rest of the journal. The second section is the reflective questions section. I love this section because they're predetermined questions that allow me to reflect. It's really an opportunity for me to have self-discovery. The third section is the conversation format.
The conversational format is a helpful tool to use when preparing for a class because it requires you to really dig into the material that you are reading or watching or listening to, and it's kind of like you're just having a conversation with yourself or with someone else, and it just makes it a lot easier for you to process your thinking so that you really can take the most from your assignment.
One of the things that is being effective in what Mark's doing is he's got that right-hand side of the page, right, where he structured the note-taking almost in a kind of a Cornell Notes approach there on the left in the preparation. But then he's asking students in real time, right there in the class, he says, okay, we've talked about this, I want you to take 2 minutes and write in narrative form your thinking. The other thing that I think is powerful about this process is that it relies heavily on metacognition. Now, metacognition is a term that educators use to talk about that moment when students pull back from the process of learning to actually think about the process, right? To think about their thinking, to learn about their process of learning, right? And so one of the things that I think is being effective here is that this journaling technique is allowing students in real time to be metacognitive about what they're learning, to not just kind of have the thoughts, but then to think about the thoughts.
I want you to write that statement again on the open side of your journal, and I really want you to clarify it. In fact, after you've gotten it written, I want you to mentally, and even whispering if you want, I want you to rehearse what that statement is to see if it makes sense to you.
Here at Brigham Young University, Idaho, we have a model for learning. We call it the learning model, and it identifies certain principles that that lead to successful learning and teaching. And the important thing to note about the learning model is it's not a set of practices, it's a set of principles. And because of that, classes that are applying the learning model, if they're applying the principles, they may look totally different depending on if you're in the math department, in the education department, geology, physics, whatever it may be. The principles will remain the same, but the practices often differ. And in a like manner, Mark Orchard has a certain set of principles that he tries to apply, and he ends up developing practices that are very unique to the way he teaches. What perhaps has to happen is an understanding of what exactly are the principles he's using, and then determine how might those principles be applied in a totally different field. And I think that's possible.
One of the principles that I've contemplated a lot about is the idea of the students finding their voice.
For most people, in most circumstances, but that not everyone can be served best in a college setting.
So the idea of the students being able to find their voice became a real critical fulcrum of their learning, and the only way that they find voice is through the principle of ownership. In order for me to own it, and once I do own it, then I do not just leave the classroom and toss it to the wayside, but it's something that I take with me.
We are divided into small groups, usually groups of 4 to 8, and you come in and you discuss with your fellow classmates the reading from the night before. We talk to each other and we understand where each other is coming from. This isn't a class where we sit and we debate about controversial issues or where we get upset with each other for thinking different things, but where it's a whole pool of learning where we all are contributing to it, and we have the opportunity to learn from each other, which I haven't had a class where I sit and I actually learn a ton from the other students in the class.
Upon going to Mark Orchard's class for the first time, I was surprised with the way that he had structured the class. And I recognized that this was not going to be a class where I learned primarily from the professor, but this was going to be a class where I learned primarily from my fellow students.
So this is really my pitch. You guys have started, and I'm going to, maybe this morning, which is fine, that's when I did my prep today, but let's say you even did it last night. And you took the time to really invest in trying to understand this stuff, and you did your work, your preparation. You came here to class. You took a position that was potentially opposite, which requires effort for you to understand. You've sat down, you've articulated, you've done a tremendous amount of work. You've then gone to where you even were able to identify what your real position is. You're able to state it, restate it. You went around the group, you had this amazing amount of effort. Now you finally come up with one question. Is there work involved in that?
Mark Orchard is able to engage all the students in class by giving everybody an opportunity to speak, for everybody to have an opportunity to participate, which I think is really unique. I haven't been in a lot of classes where all 30 to 50 students are all participating other than just writing notes.
Life is really about problem solving. And granted, we give students case studies and they experiment it, but I think the process really is the secret. The process of being able to learn, if no more than learn how to listen. So much of the time when somebody is speaking and our minds are thinking, okay, if they would just be quiet, so then I can share what my idea is, or even if it's in opposition of what this other individual says, particularly if it's in opposition, I need to have the capacity to really learn how to listen. So we spend a great deal of time on engagement, on using the principle of having somebody state their position. And then particularly if I'm in contrary to that position, is where it's really powerful, is I step back and say, okay, so this is what I heard you said. You said this and this and this. Is that correct? When I'm trying to learn or listen to another person of opposition, I need to make sure that I take whatever my pile of what my agenda is, I have to remove it entirely off the table so that person feels connected.
And in fact, I think one of the things that happens really well is that Mark in this class focuses heavily on process. In the literature, there used to be something called the hidden curriculum, and it was almost always talked about in negative terms, right? That as we're trying to teach math, what we're really teaching is obedience to authority, right? Through the process, or that we're really teaching, kind of thoughtless filling out of worksheets. And so there was this sense that the process was kind of working against us while we were trying to teach this. What Mark's done is he's brought that process back in a positive way and said, we're not only going to focus on the content of what we're trying to learn here in terms of interpersonal communications or the other issues that he's teaching, we're going to be very conscious about this hidden curriculum, about the things that we're learning from the process of doing it.
I think I felt most engaged in Mark Orchard's classes when we were conversing as groups. I mean, anytime he'd let us go off and have discussion with our groups, it felt like the most learning was taking place and the most note-taking was happening, and I got to see so many different perspectives and hear all the ideas that other people took from their preparation, and it just turned you into a much more open-minded person. And I think when your mind is open, then you're literally able to take in more information and your learning becomes more beneficial.
He's kind of routinized all of the processes of student interaction in a way that rather than detracting from what he's trying to actually teach, that hidden curriculum becomes actually a support of what he's trying to teach. And so the process becomes visible. John Hattie, who we've talked about a lot on this campus, who did lots and lots of empirical research about those variables that impact learning the most and those that only impact it marginally, said that among all of the variables that lead to positive, successful teaching, one of the highest is making the process visible.
Use the timer again, go through that same process, state and restate. Safety is really just from a personal experience of when I feel most willing to contribute or to be able to share my ideas. If the environment that I feel safe, that I can actually expose some of my ignorance, that's what we're trying to get the students to do. What is it that you really think? If they don't feel safe that they can do that, safe, I would suppose, would mean not being judged by my peers of being incompetent, not worrying about me saying something that perhaps sounded incompetent or would be looked at as incompetent, to just take the non-judgment or the judgment aspect out of commenting from the class. One of the key ingredients that I use is when students make a response is to spend a moment and reflect upon what they've said with them so that they understand, and even through the principle of me just restating, this is what I heard you say. And then through the process of modeling, we have the students state and restate with each other in their groups so that they learn to not only articulate what they're thinking, but to make sure that as a listener, which takes a tremendous amount more work, to be able to repeat back to them, this is what I heard you say. That process of feeling heard creates an environment of sharing and an environment that I think really impacts learning at a high level.
As a principal, I think one of the things that's working in this class is that Mark has established with his own teaching persona, with his communication skills, and with a particular way of interfacing with the students, he's established a very safe culture and a very motivating culture for the students.
So one emphasis that Mark Orchard has in his classes is that there are these 3 stages in the learning process. The first one being what, second one so what, third one being now what. What would be just kind of the core subject matter that you learned for that day. The so what would be learning how that's relevant for us, how that's relevant as students or as citizens or as people of faith. Then the third portion is the now what. And that's how are you going to take what you're learning in this class and apply it.
The structure of reflective learning and constructive learning that happens in Mark Orchard's class has affected me not only in how I learn specific subjects in school, but it's also changed how I view relationships.
Mark Orchard's all about helping you find your right answer and learning why that's important to you and how what's important to you applies to the content.
Another advantage that I've seen to this class structure that has really impacted me is I've truly learned that I can learn from anybody. And when I've come away from Orchard's classes, sometimes the most profound lessons that I've learned were not things that he necessarily taught me, but something that a classmate of mine who was within my group taught me that particular day.